Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Dollar Dialogue. Today's episode 36, Crossing Borders, the Impact of Immigration and Tourism on Portugal's Economic Landscape with Mr. Hamdan Karim. Mr. Hamdan Karim is currently a freshman at the American International School, Dhaka, and he's very much interested in learning about the economies of world, and he's very much fascinated by learning about the economies of countries in Europe, like Portugal. One of the reasons he's fascinated by the Portuguese economy because one of his favorite football players is Cristiano Ronaldo. And for this reason, he has researched a lot about Portuguese economy, and he's very much interested in learning about how the economy of Portugal functions and sharing his insights into today's discussions. Mr. Hamdan Karim, thank you for joining us to this podcast. Is there anything that you would like to add to the introduction?
Yes, I'm just very excited to be a part of this. I've been dreaming about this moment for a long time now.
Thank you, Mr. Hamdan Karim. Let's get into our discussion for today. Before we talk about the impact of Portugal's economy due to immigration and all such matters, I would like to talk a little bit about Portugal and how the economic functions. And Portugal GDP is forecast to grow at around 1.7% in 2024, increasing to roughly 2.2% in 2025 to 2026 before moderating in later years, reflecting a steady, though modest, recovery trajectory. And the Bank of Portugal has recently revised its projections upward for 2025, citing improved financing conditions and acceleration of external demand. And the inflation is gradually declining, with forecasts near 2.1% in 2025, indicating a return to price stability after a period of volatility. And public debt remains high at around 95% of GDP in 2024, though it has been on a downward trend since the bailout period. And managing this debt is crucial for fiscal sustainability, particularly as the government implements structural reforms. And there also has been a lot of recent fiscal adjustments which have been done to lift projections from a surplus to a small deficit around 0.1% of GDP in 2025 due to rising public spending and continuing costs from recovering fund projects. And the government's effort to tighten fiscal policy remain challenged by the need to support recovery measures. And tourism is also a cornerstone of the economy, contributing around 16 to 20% of GDP, with the sector buoyed by record number of foreign visitors and strong domestic consumptions. And the service sector, including trade, finance, and business services, dominates the economy, accounting for 70% of GDP. And exports have been bolstered by enhanced price competitiveness, particularly towards EU markets and the US. However, import levels in certain segments have sometimes offset this gain, and over 70% of Portugal's trade occurs within the EU, making it highly sensitive to European economic conditions. And there also has been a lot of significant investments in renewable energy, especially in wind and hydraulic power, which have reduced reliance on imported fossil fuels and generated long-term cost savings. And these efforts contribute to environmental sustainability and help reposition Portugal in the global green economy. Portugal is also continues to lag behind, how unfortunately, behind the EU average in labor productivity, which hampers long-term competitiveness and economic growth. And addressing productivity gaps is crucial for sustaining long future growth and improving living standards. And an aging population with combined significant immigration, particularly among youth graduates, with estimates suggesting that up to 40% live annually, poses risk to future innovation, skill level, and fiscal revenues. And there also have been efforts to reverse brain drain through tax incentives and housing support for younger workers, which are underway but face uncertain long-term effectiveness. And Portugal's recovery and resilience plan, which has been supported over 16 billion euros in grants and loans, targets deep structural reforms to accelerate the green and digital transitions, modernize infrastructure, and upgrade public services. And these reforms aim to remove bottlenecks, boost investments, and enhance overall competitiveness. And there also have been key reforms in areas including digitalization of public administration and education, energy efficiency improvements, and measures to increase job creation and economic diversification. The plan also emphasizes long-term social resilience, such as affordable housing and healthcare improvements, to support broader economic stability. And the majority of Portugal's trade occurs within the EU, with external adjustments driven by shifts in global demand and the EU trends. And there's also an ongoing need to monitor external factors such as potential US tariffs or changes in domestic supply chains that could impact export performance. And there also have been recent calls from Portuguese officials for deeper EU-US dialogue, which underscore concerns about potential tariff escalations that could harm export markets and consumer welfare. And the regions like Madeira have benefited from targeted initiatives such as the Madeira International Business Center, AMIBC, and which offers favorable tax regimes and incentives to attract investments in niche sectors such as cryptocurrency and tech innovation. There also has been overemployment, which has improved with a gradual decline in unemployment. However, youth unemployment remains slightly higher than EU average, creating challenges for long-term growth and economic stability. And immigration, in a way, also plays a crucial role in bolstering the labor force, partially offsetting domestic demographic challenges. And so, this is a very brief introduction about the Portuguese economy. So, what's your opinion on the Portuguese economy and how it has been shaped in the past, and how do you think it's going to perform in the future, Mr. Handam Karim, Mr. Arif Malik, or Mr. Shazib Karim? Mr. Arif Malik, I see your hand is raised. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, apologies, the mic wasn't turning on. So yeah, I would unequivocally agree with the statements that you have made, Araf. And also, I would like to talk a bit more about the Portugal's economy. Like obviously, Portugal is represented by Hamdan's favorite player, Cristiano Ronaldo, and surprisingly, through that, the GDP is actually has boosted by quite a lot. That's the assumption that I actually thought at the beginning, but after further analysis, Portugal's economy, in my opinion, is not in a very good condition because, first of all, as of recent data, Portugal's economy is diversified, including everything from traditional sectors like agriculture, fishing, and mining to modern sectors like technology, automotive, and renewable energy. But following the financial crisis of 2008, Portugal experienced significant economic reforms and a notable contractionary period. The tourism sector has been a standout for Portugal, which has contributed significantly to Portugal's GDP. However, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a severe impact, especially since the economy is heavily reliant on tourism. For instance, Portugal GDP, if I'm not mistaken, contracted by around 8% in 2020 due to the pandemic, but has shown signs of slight recovery. For example, in 2021, the economy grew by around 5%, aided by the resumption of global economic activities. And I think economy is, of course, the gross domestic product. It measures how healthy a country is, especially as an economics. We are actually talking about GDP, which is basically the final market value of goods and services produced in a country within a time period. So essentially, we are looking for higher GDP, and even more so than GDP. I think it's more relevant to look at GDP per capita, which shows the GDP distributed across all the citizens in a country. Portugal's GDP per capita is considerably lower than all the other Mediterranean regions in Europe, and obviously compared to other countries like in Western Europe and Central Europe, like Germany or France, like Portugal's clearly lagging behind. And I think one of the biggest problems that we need to address here is the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate has been improving over the years, but it's still relatively one of the highest in Europe. And on top of that, Portugal's economy has a high public debt, which is around 127% of the GDP. And this clearly shows that Portugal's economy has shown clear growth in terms of tourism, but they have high unemployment. They have a lot of public debt. Hamdan, would you like to chime in?
Yeah, to add on to the question, answering Araf Malik's question, Portugal's economy has experienced steady growth, with GDP increasing by 6.8% in 2022, driven by rebound in travel, tourism, and personal consumption. The European Commission forecasts GDP growth rates of 1.7% for 2024, 1.9% for 2025, and 2.1% for 2026, indicating a positive trajectory. This, this growth has been accompanied by fiscal consolidation, with public debt declining from 125% of GDP in 2017 to 95.3% by the end of 2024.
I would agree with Hamdan. And Hamdan, I in fact have a question for you, since you're very knowledgeable about Portugal in particular. Hamdan, what do you think immigration plays in Portugal's economy? Do you think immigration is helping to offset the demographic challenges of an aging population in Portugal, or do you think immigration is actually affecting Portugal in a negative way, since the more immigration means higher unemployment?
A very good question. I think immigration is a key factor in Portugal's economic growth, workforce sustainability, and demographic balance. So, firstly, there is labor market and workforce sustainability. Portugal has an aging population and low birth rates, leading to a shrinking workforce. Immigrants immigrants help fill gaps in key sectors like construction, healthcare, agriculture, and hospitality. The other point is economic contribution. So immigrants pay income taxes and contribute to Portugal's social security system, helping sustain pensions and public services. And also another part of that is tourism and service industry. Many immigrants work in tourism, a key pillar of Portugal's economy. They help sustain the industry, which contributes nearly 15% of GDP.
Mr. Shazib Karim, Mr. Shazib Karim, I see your hand is raised. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, so just to add on to the insights that have been said already, I'd say that, you know, like Arif had also brought up the factor of immigration, and I'd say that immigrants have been instrumental in filling labor shortages in key industries from agriculture to technology. And the tech sector in particular has seen an influx of skilled professionals attracted by Portugal's relatively low cost of living and government incentives like the startup visa. But as with any economic shift, there are challenges. The housing market, already strained by rising demand, is facing increased pressure because there isn't enough supply for the demand. So that obviously leads to shortages. And rents have skyrocketed, particularly in Lisbon and Porto, leading to debates over whether immigration policies should be adjusted to account for affordability concerns. And there's also, we could also talk about the tourism as it's like Portugal's golden goose, right? Tourism is really popular in Portugal, and in 2023 alone, over 25 million tourists visited the country, pumping billions into the economy. And the tourism sector contributes around 17% of Portugal's GDP, supporting businesses from hotels and restaurants to transportation services as well. And so, it brings up like some questions, like where does Portugal go from here? Like, should the government implement stricter regulations on short-term rentals, and can the country balance economic growth with local affordability? So what do you guys think?
Yes, Mr. Arif Malik, I see your hand is raised. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, apologies. The mic. Uh, uh, yes, apologies. The mic wasn't. My mic's very disruptive today. So yeah, to answer Shaz's question, I think definitely immigration is a multifaceted issue, and just to talk about some of the, I think it's like a double-edged sword, or in Spanish, as we say, arma en doble fila. It's like immigration on one hand is definitely good for Portugal because obviously, I think Hamdan brought it up. Portugal has an aging population, and in fact, Portugal has one of the oldest populations in Europe with a median age significantly higher than the other EU average. And I think based on that, immigrants who often arrive at a younger age from like North Africa or from North Africa primarily, they help to balance the age distribution and contribute to the pension system, alleviating some of the pressure on social services designed for the elderly. And also, we have to keep in mind that Portugal has one of the lowest birth rates in the EU. So Portugal's population has been declining, and I think based on that, immigrations definitely helped stabilize the decline, but in some areas have contributed to population growth, rejuvenating communities and sustaining local economies. But I think one of the major problems when we talk about immigration, and obviously this is a very polarizing issue, is the social and cultural impacts. On one hand, some people view immigration, for example, they see immigrants as enriching the cultural landscape of Portugal by introducing new customs, traditions, and cuisines from primarily, let's say, North Africa. But this diversity is often met with challenges of people from specifically the right wing political spectrum who think that immigrants are like essentially ruining the purity of the country, and that's what most of the right wing immigrants, I mean right wing population think. So I think based on that, there's immigration obviously has polarizing impact on the cultural aspect. But this is an economic podcast, and I'm an economist, and I think as an economist, any rational economist will definitely say that immigration for Portugal is definitely helping, because Portugal has an aging population. Who's going to do all of the construction, all the agriculture work? The elderly people are not going to do it. So it obviously has to be young people, but Portugal doesn't have a lot of young people, and most of them either since Portugal is part of the EU, most of them just go to other EU countries and work. So based on that, immigrants, in my opinion, will help Portugal maintain its economic stability. And on top of that, I think Portugal should also assist immigrants in becoming more active members of the society, so that the labor productivity of the immigrants also increase. Because in economy, talking in terms of GDP, the labor productivity is the most important. It doesn't matter how many hours the labor works. What matters more is the productivity and efficiency. So I think if the government of Portugal implemented legislature aimed at improving the productivity and teaching the migrants more high skilled work, I think Portugal should be headed in a really good direction. I see Hamdan's hand is raised. Hamdan, would you like to chime into the conversation?
Oh, sorry, my mic was not working. Okay, so I mean, uh, okay, so let's start with the basics. Portugal, as said before, has an aging population. The birth rates are very low. Fewer young people are entering the workforce, and that's a serious issue for the economy. I mean, think about it. If there aren't enough workers, who's going to keep industries running? And that's where immigration comes in. In the past decades, Portugal has welcomed hundreds of thousands of immigrants, mainly from Brazil, Cape Verde, Angola, India, and even parts of Europe like Ukraine. These workers are filling critical roles in construction, agriculture, hospitality, and healthcare. For example, Portugal's booming tourism industry, one of the biggest contributors to its economy, relies heavily on immigrant workers. Hotels, restaurants, and travel services need people to keep things running. Without immigration, there would be serious labor shortages in these sectors. But it's not just low-skilled jobs. Portugal has also been attracting tech workers, digital nomads, and entrepreneurs thanks to its startup-friendly policies. Lisbon has become a bit of a tech hub, drawing in talent from all over the world. And guess what? Those immigrants are starting businesses, creating jobs, and pumping money into the economy.
Mr. Shazib Koi, my hand is raised. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, sure. And to add on, I think like another sector that we can talk about is like the policy responses and the road ahead in the future, because the Portuguese government has been proactive in navigating these challenges. Because policies like the Golden Visa program initially encouraged foreign investment in real estate, but with rising housing costs, the program has been scaled back to direct funds in other sectors. And on the tourism front, there are discussions about implementing sustainability measures such as limiting tourist numbers in density areas and incentivizing travel to lesser visited regions. But this brings up a question which I want to ask you guys. Can Portugal maintain its economic momentum while ensuring that both immigrants and locals thrive in the long run?
Yeah, so I think that's a very interesting question. And to answer the question, I think it's very important to look at Portugal's economy. And again, our topic of discussion for today's episode 36, crossing borders, the impact of immigration and tourism on Portugal's economic landscape. And I think it's also very important to answer that question to look at the demographic renewal. The immigrants help in counteract Portugal's aging population, replacing the workforce and supporting consumer demand. And their inflow also sustains a dynamic labor market essential for sectors facing shortages. And immigrants fill critical gaps in industries like healthcare, constructions, and services, bolstering overall productivity. They also contribute entrepreneurial skills and diverse perspectives, fostering innovation and new business ventures. And they also have a very multicultural workforce, which enhance social dynamism and global connectivity, reinforcing international trade and investment. However, challenges in integration and the need for effective public services require coordinated policy responses. And the tourism also contributes significantly, roughly 16 to 20% of GDP, and supports millions of jobs across hospitality, retail, and transport sectors. And the inflow of foreign currency via tourism helps strengthen Portugal's current account and boost local enterprise revenues. And tourism also drives investments in infrastructure, stimulating development in less urbanized regions and spreading economic benefits more evenly. It also plays a key role in preserving cultural heritage and promoting Portuguese identity on a global stage. However, heavy reliance on tourism can create vulnerabilities, including seasonality, exposure to global trade, travel trends, and necessity in strategies for sustainable growth and diversification. So that's my response to your question, Sazib. Are there any more responses or any way you would approach the questions? Question, Mr. Hamdan Karim or Mr. Arif Malik?
I believe Hamdan's hand is raised.
Oh, sorry, my mic wasn't working. Okay, so that was a very interesting point, Mr. Arif Malik. So I have another question for you, Mr. Arif Malik. Do you think Portugal should do you think Portugal should do more to attract highly skilled immigrants, or is it better to focus on filling labor shortages in industries like tourism and construction?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question that you have raised, Hamdan. Obviously, the question of whether Portugal should focus on attracting high skilled or low skilled immigrants depends on several factors, including the current economic needs and the labor market gaps and the long term strategic goals of Portugal. I think for now, Portugal should focus on high skilled immigration because Portugal can specialize in the IT sector. As you have mentioned, Lisbon is a IT tech hub now. So by attracting talent from around the world, which Portugal has been doing in Lisbon, Portugal can enhance its competitiveness in high tech and emerging industries. And additionally, high skilled immigrants often create additional jobs by increasing demand for services or starting their own business. So it sort of has a ripple effect. But on the other hand, there's challenges. For example, high skilled immigrants might face challenges in recognition of their qualifications and integration into the local labor market. And also, attracting talent from countries with limited human capital resources can contribute to brain drain in those regions. And for Portugal, obviously, one of the important factors that has risen up in the last few years in Lisbon, particularly, is the high housing market. The rents are just way too high, and this is a problem because think about it: if all the immigrants from around the world just flock in to Lisbon, your capital, and obviously they're gonna need a place to stay, and because of the high number of people, the demand is gonna go up for housing. So essentially, a lot of people in Portugal, in Lisbon, the Portuguese people themselves, they're being sort of forced to go to the suburbs and other not they cannot like afford to live in the city center anymore. So I think that's one of the issues, the housing market that comes with high skill immigration. But I think they can Portugal the Portuguese economy can easily manage that by creating, I think, new areas in the coastal communities. And also they could potentially implement rent control in Boston. I don't know if you guys are aware of, for 20 years they had the rent control policy in which the renters couldn't were set prices that are way too high. So this allowed people a place to stay in, but with rent control, another problem comes up. It doesn't incentivize people or the landlords to create better housing because they know that they can't charge people more. So it's obviously a double-sided argument. But as an economist, I would say high-skilled immigration is what Portugal needs, because its economy is not primary. Its economy is mostly tertiary sector, which means it's like related to tourism, banking, services, stuff like those. And because of that, I think they need high-skilled laborers to actually succeed. Yeah, Hamdan, I see your hand is raised. What would you like to chime in?
Thank you. That was a wonderful way of answering my question. Okay, so I wanted to talk about the green economy of Portugal, so, like renewable energy sources. Like, did you know, like 2023, Portugal generated about 60% of its electricity from renewable, mainly wind, solar, and hydro. And in some months, the number even hit 100%. So why is this such a big deal? Energy independence. Instead of relying on expensive imported fossil fuels, Portugal investing in solar farms and offshore wind projects. There's also a push to become a major producer of green hydrogen, basically a clean alternative to fossil fuels that could be a game changer for Europe. So could Portugal become the renewable energy hub of Europe? If it plays its cards right, yes. This could be a massive economic boost in the next decade. So, if Portugal wants to compete with bigger European economies, should focus more on keeping its own young professionals, or does immigrants already solve that issue? Yes, Mr. Arif Malik, I see your hand is raised.
Thank you. I believe that's a very interesting question. And so, in my opinion, there will be also a lot of controversial impact of immigration. For example, the wage and the job competitive concerns. Critics may argue that an influx of immigrants may depress wages and intensify competition for low-skilled jobs, potentially disadvantaging native workers. There's also a lot of ongoing controversy over whether rapid immigration undermines national identity and strains public services, fueling xenophobic sentiments and political polarization. And the booming tourism sector has also been linked to rising property prices and gentrification, displacing local residents and altering traditional communities. And the mass tourism, while boosting GDP, may lead to environmental degradation and overuse of local resources, raising questions about the sustainability of current tourism models. And the government incentives such as the tax breaks and housing support aimed at attracting and retaining younger immigrants are seen by some as temporary solutions that might not address deeper structural issues. And the focus on heavily on tourism and immigration can be viewed as sidelining investments in traditional industries and innovation, potentially jeopardizing long-term economic diversification. And some commentators may also critique the heavy reliance on EU funds and recovery plans, arguing that it may create dependency and limit Portugal's policy autonomy in addressing domestic economic challenges. And concerns also persist over potential external shocks, such as escalating U.S. tariffs, which could disrupt export markets and add pressure on the economy. Which is already grappling with internal debates on open border policies. And the economic gains from both immigration and tourism are often unevenly distributed, potentially widening regional disparities and intensifying social tensions between urban hubs and rural areas. So that's my opinion. So what other opinions you may have, Mr. Shazib Karim or Malik or Mr. Hamdan Karim? Mr. Shazib Karim, I see your hand is raised. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, sure, Araf. I think you added your personal insights, and it was very insightful. And I think, you know, mm, talking about the future of Portugal and what it can have, like Ari was talking about, had the immigration skill for workforce. And I think to stay competitive, Portugal needs to diversify its economy beyond tourism and real estate, and investing in the technology sector could be a game changer. And like Ari, you had already mentioned before, in like Portugal has already positioned itself as an emerging tech hub with initiatives like Web Summit and government-backed startup incentives. And expanding these efforts will attract innovation-driven companies and create high-skilled jobs. And another key area is infrastructure and housing reform. To accommodate its growing population, both locals and immigrants, Portugal must invest in affordable housing solutions, public transport, and sustainable urban planning. Cities like Lisbon and Porto must balance economic growth with livability to prevent a long term affordability crisis. Education and workforce training are also critical. With a rapidly changing job market, Portugal should focus on upskilling its workforce, particularly in tech, green energy, and sustainable industries. Encouraging entrepreneurship and creating incentives for businesses to invest in Portuguese town can further boost economic resilience. And finally, while tourism remains a strong pillar of the economy, promoting sustainable tourism that protects local communities and resources will be essential. Encouraging visitors to explore lesser known regions could help distribute economic benefits more evenly across the country as well.
So based on a discussion, one thing that I found really interesting is how do you think are the current government policies, for example, how effective are current government initiatives such as tax breaks for young workers and housing support in retaining talent and countering the brain drain, and what further reforms might be necessary in Portugal? What's your opinion, Mr. Shazib Karim or Mr. Arif Malik or Mr. Hamdan Karim? Mr. Arif Malik, I see your hand is raised. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I think the question you asked, Araf, is a particularly difficult question because if you think about it, we can only recommend legislation change, but ultimately it's up to the government to decide. But as of right now, I think one of the most important legislation that Portugal needs to do is in the labor market integration, particularly in recognition of foreign credentials. I think they need to set specific reforms like establishing a more streamlined and transparent system for recognizing qualifications and credentials obtained outside of Portugal. And I think this system could involve a central authority that works closely with professional sectors to standardize the validation process. And the objective of this would be to essentially reduce barriers to employment for high skilled immigrants and to ensure they contribute effectively to their respective fields in the economy. Additionally, I think they need to support the entrepreneurial actions. Portugal is already doing it through startup grants, tax breaks, and mentoring programs. And I think additionally they could provide targeted support for immigrants to access business networks and financing. I think this way they could enhance the job creation through immigrant led enterprises. But more importantly, I think what we need to talk about is the health and social services and the housing and urban policy, because affordable housing is something which is sort of I believe that's a declaration of human right, like a right to live. So definitely housing is a right to live. The people have the right to live in houses, but they can't because the prices are just way too high. And based on the GDP per capita, the average citizens, even let's say like people who are like relatively wealthy, even for them it's a bit of a stretch because the housing prices are just way too high. So I think they need to develop policies that increase the supply of affordable housing, particularly in urban areas where immigrants are more likely to settle in. I think they could do zoning reforms or incentivize developers to build affordable units and rent controls in high demand areas. I think this way they could manage the influx of immigrants in a way that does not exacerbate the housing shortages or inflate property prices. And lastly, I was talking about the health and social services. So obviously, I think healthcare is an important part of our lives, and specific reforms in this sector, I think that needs to be done is to ensure that all immigrants have access to healthcare services regardless of their legal status. And I think this could involve expanding coverage under the national health system and providing information in multiple languages as well, as most of the immigrants, as Hamdan mentioned, are from Brazil, Cape Verde, North Africa, those regions. And yeah, I think based on these policies, this legislation, Portugal should be in the right hands. And also, I think other than that, more importantly, I think the social integration is a big problem as well. I don't for a policy for social integration, I think they could implement local community engagement initiatives that promote interaction between immigrants and native residents. And I think this could work because this would not only help to alleviate some of the polarization, but also make sure that the immigrants settle in and they feel comfortable. For example, if we look at the US is a country that is built off of immigrants, and immigration is often in this day and age, especially with the right wing red pill community, it's seen as a negative way. But if we look at the largest economy in the world, the US is clearly the largest economy based on the GDP, and it's built off of immigrants. So immigrants are obviously the cornerstone of the American GDP, and I think it could be the cornerstone of Portugal's GDP if Portugal can leverage high skilled immigrants and also make sure that they are culturally and socially accepted into the community as well. I think Shazib has his hand raised as well.
Yeah, sorry, the mic wasn't turning on. So, yeah, I think you brought up some really important and insightful thoughts, and I think adding on to what you said, Arib, I think also adding my own opinion, I think that immigration and tourism have undeniably shaped Portugal's economic landscape, bringing growth, jobs, and global recognition. Yet the balancing act between economic prosperity and social stability remains a challenge as Portugal moves forward. And it will need policies that support sustainable growth while preserving affordability and local well-being. So with this being said, what do you think? Should Portugal tighten its immigration policies, and or should tourism be regulated more heavily? And like, where should Portugal focus its efforts for the future? So like, where do you think Portugal's stand should be right now?
So I think that's also a very interesting question. And for the long-term prospects and the policy questions, I think there are a lot of policies that the government of Portugal could do to implement long-term economic growth by increasing the productivity of people by subsidizing many technological items. And I think in terms of economy, I think the foreign labor force is very much necessary to boost the economy and to make sure that the Portuguese nation has access to ample amount of labor to make sure that the nation functions, because right now Portugal has a very kind of aging population, and that's a concern for the economy because the economy needs productive workers. And so for this reason, the foreign labor could supplement that. And my another question is, right now I think that we're seeing that the world is currently moving towards more right leaning, and in that manner, my question to you is that to what extent do you think that the influx of tourists contribute to the controversies around immigration, and what do you think are the main controversies surrounding the cultural integration of immigrants, and how do you think that these debates influence public opinion and policy making in Portugal? Mr. Hamdan Karim, Mr. Arif Malik, or Mr. Shazib Karim? Mr. Shazil Karim, I see your hand is raised. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, sure, Araf. I think um, you brought a really interesting point about like to what extent the influx of tourism impacted the controversies related to immigration. Um, I think this is pretty interesting, and I'd say it didn't have like a huge impact, but it definitely impacted nation, the economy in some way, as we know that the EU has some regulations and laws about about immigration, and also
I believe that his internet connection cut off. Mr. Arif Malik, do you have any opinion on this issue?
wait, sorry, my mic cut off. Um, yeah, so as I was saying, the influx of tourism in Portugal it has impacted controversies related to immigration, particularly in relation to housing, labor markets, and national identity. Like, for example, one of the most contentious issues linked to tourism and immigration in Portugal is the housing crisis, particularly in Lisbon and Porto, as this was mentioned before as well. And because like the surge in tourism driven by Portugal's attractive golden visa program and the rise of short-term rental platforms like Airbnb has led to skyrocketing property prices. And many locals blame foreign investors and affluent expertise, particularly from North America and Europe, for pricing out local residents. And this has fueled resentment toward both wealthier immigrants and tourists, as many Portuguese citizens struggle with affordability in urban centers. And tourism has created job opportunities, particularly in the hospitality and service industries, like basically in the tertiary sector. However, many of these jobs are seasonal, low paying, and unsustainable. They're not sustainable. And a significant portion of Portugal's workforce in tourism related sectors consists of immigrants, particularly from Brazil, Ukraine, and Nepal. And some Portuguese citizens argue that immigration contributes to labor exploitation and wage suppression, leading to growing tensions between locals and migrant workers. And others view immigration as necessary to sustain the booming tourism sector. And the rapid growth of tourism and foreign immigration has led to concerns about the dilution of Portuguese culture and identity, because in gentrification in historic districts and an increase in expatriate communities have sparked debates about the preservation of Portuguese traditions. And some nationalist and right wing groups have used these concerns to advocate for stricter immigration policies, claiming that Portugal's openness to tourism and foreign workers is eroding its cultural fabric. And I think this just speaks volume because, like, in conclusion, like the impact of tourism on immigration related controversies in Portugal, I'd say it's substantial, because while tourism has stimulated economic growth and job creation, it has also intensified issues related to housing affordability, labor market pressures, and cultural identity. And the extent of this impact depends on government policies and social attitudes towards balancing economic benefits with local well being. And personally, I'd say that if this is left unaddressed, these tensions could fuel further political and social unrest surrounding immigration in the country.
So, Shazib, I think that a lot of interesting points have been brought up. For example, how the immigrants contribute not only to filling labor shortages in tourism related sectors, but also spur entrepreneurial ventures that can create niche tourism markets. And the major cities also, I think, can benefit from tourism driven urban renewal. However, concentrated visitor flows may lead to gentrification and displacement of long-term residents, and the rural and peripheral areas can experience revitalization if targeted policies harness both immigration and tourism to promote local culture and sustainable development. And the rapid immigration raises challenges in integration, such as language barriers, education, and social inclusion that can strain public services if not adequately planned for. And the simultaneous rise in tourism increases demand for healthcare, housing, transportation, which can potentially burden infrastructure and fuel for public debate and resource allocation. And the immigration also introduces new skills and innovative perspectives, and a more diversified economy can reduce vulnerability to external shocks. And the investments in education and vocational training for both immigrants and local residents is crucial to nurture the innovative potential of both the people of the residents who live in Portugal. And Portugal, I think, has a very positive image as an open multicultural society which is enriched by both tourism and immigration, which enhances its soft power international reputation. However, there are obviously unresolved integration issues or environmental degradation which may spark domestic backlash and complicated diplomatic relations, especially within the EU and the transatlantic trade relations. And so another question that I have is like, how vulnerable is Portugal's export sector, which is heavily integrated with the EU markets, to external risks such as potential US tariffs or global economic slowdowns? Mr. Arif Malik, Mr. Hamdan Karim, or Mr. Shazib Karim? Mr. Arif Malik, I see your hand is raised. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, definitely. I think the R of the question you asked is really interesting because Portugal's export sector is influenced by several factors that contribute to its vulnerability, and I think this includes the composition of its exports, dependence on specific EU markets and the external economic conditions. So let's talk about the composition of exports of Portugal. So Portugal's exports are relatively concentrated in a few sectors such as textile, clothing, footwear, and automotive components. And this lack of diversification can make the economy more susceptible to to sector specific downturns or disruptions. For example, the global decline in demand for textiles during economic recessions can significantly affect Portugal's export revenues. Also, high value in a few markets is another problem. A significant portion of Portugal's exports are directly directed towards the EU, specifically Spain, France, and Germany through their open borders. So this demographic and geographic concentration increases the vulnerability to economic fluctuations in these countries. Also, the economic downtowns in any of these primary market can lead to substantial decrease in demand for Portuguese exports, impacting the overall economy. Other than that, I would say there are also exchange rate fluctuation. As part of the eurozone, Portugal uses the euro, which subjects its exposed to the volatility of the euro exchange rate. While the common currency eliminates the exchange risk within the eurozone, it introduces exposure to the euro's performance against other major currencies. And its impact is that a strong euro can make Portuguese exports more expensive and less competitive in non-eurozone markets such as the United States and the UK. And this is a problem in other European countries as well, because all the EU countries, they focus on the all of them uses the euro, but majority of these countries currency depends on their internal economy, which is why relying on a central currency, for example Portugal, the European Union, I believe they are trying to make the euro more stronger. But if they make the euro more stronger, the Portuguese exports become less competitive, as it costs foreigners more money to buy these exports. Because of this, this is going to impact Portugal. And based on this, I think this is primarily one of the reasons why the Brexit happened in the first place, because there's obviously conflict within the currency. I don't think Portugal should leave the EU. It's definitely helping them. But as for Araf, to answer your question regarding the export sector, I think yes, Portugal is 100% in a vulnerable state, and what they need to do is diversify their economy. Either through they're already doing it through tourism, but they could also do it through other means, such as like in the Middle East, where they are also investing in other services in other countries, for example banking sectors in other countries. Or they could also enhance their footballing league as well, because if I'm not mistaken, the only big club in Portugal is Sporting Lisbon, which Hamdan is a big fan of, and Shazib as well. So other than that, Portugal's football capacities are obviously not that up to the European level, as we see in Europe with the as we see in England with the Premier League, and with Spain in La Liga. So obviously, I think they could improve upon that as well to garner more attention.
Yeah, I think like improving on like their marketing and like focusing on their footballing league, like um could be very beneficial to their economy. Like you said, are like looking at England's, especially like the Premier League is the biggest one, and it brings massive revenue. And like in Portugal's league, I think it's called forgot what it was, Liga. I think it was Liga Portugal. There are some big teams like Porto FC, Sporting, and um, Port and Benfica. Yeah, Benfica is also pretty big, but they all obviously can like catch up with the other big teams like in the Premier League, for example. But yeah, I think like investing in that could like could massively benefit their economy. Like as we can see, Saudi Arabia is trying so hard to invest in football. But yeah.
Thank you for all the valuable insights that have been shared. And another question that I have is that I think is very important that we talk about is how do the impacts of immigration and tourism intersect to shape Portugal's overall economic landscape, particularly in terms of stimulating domestic consumption and in enhancing service public sector innovation. In my opinion, because Portugal currently has a lot of immigrants, and it has also a very robust immigration system in terms of how accessible it is for other people to enter the country. I think this has helped Portugal a lot in terms of increasing the GDP per capita, because as there are more people in the country, it has helped the country's citizens, and it has also helped the country's businesses, as there are more the consumer demand in the country. So a lot of people from other countries are entering Portugal, and they need food, they need shelter, and they're kind of in a way boosting local economy, and that's what also tourism is doing in terms of boosting local demand. So the question that I have is that how might future demographic trends, including continuing immigration and aging a native population, reshape the country's economic policies and labor dynamics? Mr. Arif Malik, Mr. Hamdan Karim, or Mr. Shazib Karim? Mr. Hamdan Karim, I see your hand is raised. Would you like to add anything?
That was a very good point, and a very good question as well. Okay, to answer the question, Portugal is at crossroads when it comes to demographics. It has an aging population, low birth rates, and a growing reliance on immigration to sustain its workforce. These trends will significantly shape economic policies and labor dynamics in the coming years. Here's how. So, uh, for economic policies shifting towards sustainability, as more people retire and fewer workers contribute to social security, Portugal will face challenge in funding pensions. Possible solutions include raising retirement age and increasing immigration or reforming pension policies. Labor dynamics and changing work environments is also another point. Portugal has already embraced digital nomad, offering visa programs to remote workers. This trend will likely expand, bringing in highly skilled professionals who contribute to the economy without competing for local jobs. With fewer young workers, the government will need to invest in retraining older workers and promoting lifelong learning to keep the economy competitive. As immigration increases, workplaces will become more multicultural, requiring stronger labor rights and anti-discrimination policies to ensure fair wages and working conditions. Portugal's future economic strength depends on how well it manages these demographic shifts. Immigration will play a critical role in keeping the economy afloat, but policies must ensure that both immigrants and local benefit. Meanwhile, adapting labor markets to automation, improving work-life balance, and ensuring pension sustainability will be key priorities. Would Portugal be better off focusing on retaining its young professionals, or should it double down on immigration to solve labor shortages? What do you guys think?
Yes, Mr. Shazib Karim has raised his hand. Would you like to add anything, Mr. Shazib Karim?
Yeah, so I think that like Portugal's economy and national landscape could undergo significant transformations in the future, depending on like other key future developments. Like for example, one thing that we could look at is like the immigration and labor market shifts and the other demographics. Like we could look at the aging population versus skilled immigration. And Portugal faces an aging population and declining birth rates, which could lead to labor shortages and economic stagnation if not addressed. Because attracting high skilled workers in tech, healthcare, and green industries will be crucial for sustaining economic growth. And reforms in immigration and residency programs, like for example, the Golden Visa program has been restricted, but Portugal may introduce new policies to attract foreign professionals rather than just real estate investors. And potential impact of this could be like a well managed immigration strategy could address labor shortages and drive innovation, but failure to integrate immigrants into the workforce could create social tensions.
Yes, Mr. Arif Malik, your hand is also raised. Would you like to add anything? I believe Mr. Arif Malik's internet is not working, and so obviously, in my opinion, there is a lot of contentious topic, and this is a very contentious topic because the Portugal's policy and governance controversies. For example, there is a contentious debate over whether fiscal incentives such as tax breaks for more younger workers are sustainable for retaining talent, or if they merely mass deeper structural issues such as inadequate job creation or low wage levels. And critics also point to the risk of over dependence on EU funds and recovery plans, which might limit national policy autonomy in the long run. And there's also a balancing between the immediate benefits of boosted tourism revenues and labor market expansion with long term investments in innovation and public infrastructure, which remains a persistent challenge. And the positive image of Portugal as an open, multicultural society enriched by both tourism and immigration enhances its soft power international reputation. And there's also, conversely, there's also a lot of unresolved integration issues or environmental degradation, which may spark domestic backlash and complicate domestic relations, especially within the EU and the transatlantic partners. There's also a lot of proactive engagement in international dialogue and strategic partnership, which is necessary to safeguard export markets and attract foreign investments. And I think that immigration is necessary for Portugal. However, immigration has to be done in a manner that supports the Portuguese economy, and that could be done by offering skill-based courses to the immigrants as well as Portuguese citizens, so that they're able to enter the workforce with a lot of skilled labor, so that they're also able to increase the productivity in Portugal. And while tourism can boost the consumer demand, I think that just depending on tourism cannot make a country like Portugal function itself properly in the long term. And it's very important that Portugal opens itself up to immigrants so that they can come in and they can, in a way, be a substitute for the aging population, and they can work and contribute to the economy and increase economic productivity. So, what do you think the government of Portugal should do in the future to increase Portugal's economic prosperity? Mr. Hamdan Karim, Mr. Arif Malik, or Mr. Shazib Karim? Mr. Shazib Karim, as your hand is raised, would you like to add anything? I believe his mic is not
Yeah.
turning on. Mr. Arif Malik, is it? Yeah, Shazib Karim, Mr. Shazib Karim, would you like to add anything?
Yes, I think like looking at Portugal's future, I think we can conclude like there could be a shift towards a more resilient and diversified economy, and Portugal's economy is at a crossroads. Future changes in trade, technology, energy, and immigration policies could determine whether it remains vulnerable to external risks or becomes a more resilient, high tech, and sustainable economy. Because I'd say that if Portugal embraces innovation, renewable energy, and labor market reforms, it can reduce dependence on tourism and real estate. However, if housing costs remain high and demographic challenges worsen, economic inequalities and social tensions may intensify. Ultimately, Portugal's ability to adapt to global trends and EU policies will shape its long term economic success.
Mr. Arif Malik, as your hand is raised, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I think Shazib covered the points really well. And other than that, I would say I would also recommend some policies to mitigate the vulnerability. I would say particularly Portugal needs to diversify its market by expanding into new international markets, and they can do so through the technology sector and also by promoting growth in other industrial sectors, or even agriculture, which can help reduce the economic impact of downturns in any single sector. And other than that, I would say the Portuguese economy, other than that, they should also focus more on the vocational training programs uh, to the to the immigrants. And specifically, I think they could expand access to Portuguese language courses and the vocational training tailored to market needs. And these programs should be made available soon after immigrants arrive and should be accessible nationwide for free. I think this would overall improve the employability of immigrants as well as facilitate their integration into society. Overall, I think these policy recommendations should be conducive for Portugal's economic growth.
So I think that brings us to the end of our discussion for today. And in a brief, concise summary, I think that the dual drivers for growth in Portugal are immigration and tourism, which are central to Portugal's economic dynamism, fueling labor supply and consumer spending, and the economic benefits and the immigration economic benefits on because of immigration. There are obviously a lot of challenges as well. The new arrivals can help counteract an aging population and fill labor gaps, though they also raise concerns over job competition and social integration. And the tourism has also significantly contributed to GDP and job creation, but risks include environmental strain and rising living costs. And together, immigration and tourism boost domestic consumption, encourage innovation, and enhance the nation's global appeal. And while needs to be effective structural reforms, public investments and balance in regulation are needed to harness benefits while mitigating challenges when it comes to having an economy that's heavily based on tourism and having a aging population which can be countered with foreign labor. So, is that a conclusion that all of you would agree with? Mr. Hamdan Karim, Mr. Arif Malik, and Mr. Shazim Karim.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I also agree.
Thank you everyone for your agreements, and that brings us to the end of our discussion for today, episode 36, Crossing Borders, the Impact of Immigration and Tourism on Portugal's Economic Landscape with Mr. Hamdan Karim. Mr. Hamdan Karim, are there any final words that you would like to say before we depart for today?
Yeah, this was just a wonderful experience for me. I was always dreaming for this moment, and now it's finally come, and it was a wonderful experience. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for those final words. And that brings us to the end of our discussion for today, episode 36, Crossing Borders, the Impact of Immigration and Tourism on Portugal's economic landscape with Mr. Hamdan Karim. And that's it for today. Thank you to the audience for tuning into today's discussion. And I hope that you enjoyed it. And we hope to see you next week with another very interesting topic, with another very interesting guest speaker. Thank you and goodbye for now.